The crystal chandelier dripped light onto the ravenous crowd, a constellation of manufactured stars for a manufactured society. Lena felt each point of light as a needle against her skin. The emerald green silk of her dress, a color meant to signify life and renewal, felt like a shroud. Across from her, Damien's smile was a slash of white in his handsome face, an expression that never reached his eyes. His grip on her arm was a manacle disguised as affection. He leaned in, his voice a venomous whisper meant only for her, though a dozen pairs of eyes watched, hungry for drama. "You are an embarrassment. Look at you, clinging to me as if you have any value on your own. Did you really think marrying me would erase what you are? You are nothing without my name." Each word was a carefully aimed stone, and Lena felt her foundations crumble. The champagne flute in her hand trembled, the bubbles rising and dying in a frantic, silent scream. Her breath hitched. The room, once a grand ballroom, began to shrink, the walls closing in, the murmur of the gala turning into a deafening roar inside her head. A camera flashed, stealing a snapshot of her despair. Another. The world was a constellation of judging eyes and blinding lights. Damien's face swam before her, his lips still moving, forming words of casual cruelty that no longer registered as sound. She saw the flash of a broken past in his eyes, a life she had tried to escape only to find herself in a more gilded cage. She dropped the flute. It shattered on the marble floor, a sound that seemed to echo the breaking within her. The world tilted, the crystal lights smearing into streaks of white pain. Then, darkness consumed her. She was falling, and for a terrifying, liberating moment, she didn't care if she ever landed. The last thing she perceived was a sudden shift in the room's atmosphere, a cold wave of silence that cut through the noise, and a shadow moving with impossible speed. A low voice, smooth as polished steel and cold as a winter night, sliced through the stunned silence of the grand ballroom. Get away from her. It was not a command shouted, but a whisper that carried the weight of an executioner's judgment. 100 guests, a sea of tuxedos and glittering gowns, froze. Phones that had been raised to capture Lena's humiliation now held steady, their lenses fixed on the source of that terrifying calm. Kaido stood there, a specter from her past summoned by her despair.
He hadn't changed.
His suit was impossibly black, tailored to fit a frame that moved with the fluid grace of a predator. His face was a mask of stoic indifference, but his eyes, dark and deep, were fixed on Damien, and in them burned an ancient, controlled fire. Damien, who commanded boardrooms and terrified subordinates with a single glance, visibly flinched. He released Lena's arm, as if it were hot iron. "This is a private matter," Damien stammered, his bravado evaporating under Kaido's gaze. Kaido didn't even look at him. His focus was on Lena's crumpled form on the floor, the emerald silk pooled around her like fallen leaves. He moved then, not with the haste of panic, but with a deliberate, reverent purpose. He knelt, his movements precise and silent, and gathered her into his arms. She was impossibly light, a fragile thing he had once sworn to protect and had failed. The scent of her perfume, a faint trace of jasmine and something uniquely her, filled his senses, a ghost of a memory he had tried to bury for 3 years. He rose, holding her securely against his chest. The crowd parted before him, a silent, fearful wave. He could feel their stares, hear the frantic, silent thrum of their heartbeats. They saw the head of the Ishikawa-gumi, a man whose name was spoken in hushed tones in the darkest corners of the city. But all Kaido could feel was the woman in his arms, the woman he had let go, and the cold, unadulterated rage that churned in his gut, a rage directed at the man who had hurt her and at himself for allowing it to happen. Lena awoke to the scent of rain and cedarwood. The world came back to her not in a rush, but as a slow, gentle tide. She was lying on a bed of impossible softness, covered by a simple gray blanket. The room was vast and minimalist, a symphony of charcoal, glass, and polished concrete. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed a sprawling cityscape, its lights twinkling like a fallen galaxy against the rain-streaked darkness. This was not her home. Her home was a gilded prison of cream carpets and suffocating floral arrangements. This place was different. It was quiet. It was safe. A figure stood by the window, his silhouette a stark cutout against the glittering vista. Kaido. He turned as if sensing her consciousness. He had removed his suit jacket, and his white shirt was open at the collar, the sleeves rolled up to his forearms, revealing the intricate lines of a dragon tattoo coiling around his skin. "You're awake," he said, his voice softer now, stripped of the icy command it held at the gala. He crossed the room and offered her a glass of water, his movements economical and graceful. She sat up, her body aching with a weariness that went deeper than muscle. She took the glass, her fingers brushing against his. A jolt, small but potent, passed between them. It was a memory of a different time, a time of stolen kisses in hidden alleyways and whispered promises under neon signs. "Where am I?" she asked, her voice raspy. "My home," he replied simply. "You're safe here, safe." The word felt foreign on her tongue. When was the last time she had felt safe? Not since him. Not since he had walked away, leaving her with a shattered heart and the cold explanation that his world was no place for her. An older man with kind eyes and a severe posture entered the room. "The doctor has left, Kaido-sama. He said she is suffering from exhaustion and dehydration." He advised rest. Kaido nodded, never taking his eyes off Lena. "Thank you, Kenji." The man bowed and retreated, leaving them in the charged silence. "Why?" Lena finally asked, the single word holding the weight of 3 years of unanswered questions. "Why did you help me?" Kaido looked out at the rain-lashed city. "Because no one," he said, his voice low and intense, "is allowed to hurt you but me. And I was finished hurting you a long time ago." The days that followed bled into a quiet routine, a stark contrast to the chaotic turbulence of her life with Damien. Kaido's penthouse became her sanctuary, a silent fortress suspended above the roaring city. He gave her space, an entire wing of the apartment for her own, but his presence was a constant, reassuring hum in the background. He would leave a tray with breakfast outside her door each morning, miso soup, grilled fish, and green tea, a silent offering. In the evenings, they would often find themselves in the main living area, separated by the vast expanse of the room but connected by the shared silence. The public fallout was a storm raging far below them. Damien had launched a vicious media campaign, painting her as a mentally unstable adulteress who had run off with a notorious criminal. Kaido's name was everywhere, whispered with fear and fascination. He built a wall of silence around her, his people intercepting calls and filtering the news so she was insulated from the poison. One evening, she found him on the balcony, staring out at the city as a gentle snow began to fall, dusting the world in white. "I never understood why you left," she said, her voice barely a whisper against the wind. He didn't turn. "I told you why. My life, what I am, it would have destroyed you. What Damien did was better," she countered, a bitter edge to her voice. He finally looked at her, and in his eyes, she saw a flicker of something she hadn't seen in years, a deep, profound vulnerability. "No," he admitted. "That was a mistake. I thought I was trading your heart for your safety. I didn't realize I was leaving you with neither." He looked tired, she noticed. There were faint shadows under his eyes that hadn't been there before, and a certain weariness in his posture that his formidable presence couldn't quite conceal. He coughed, a small, dry sound he tried to stifle, but she heard it. It was a crack in his armor of invincibility. She walked closer, pulling the cashmere throw tighter around her shoulders. "You don't have to protect me anymore, Kaido." He gave a sad, small smile. "It seems to be the only thing I'm good at." They stood there for a long time, watching the snow blanket the city, two lonely souls finding a fragile warmth in the shared cold. A week later, Lena was sketching by the window, a charcoal stick moving across the page, trying to capture the defiant beauty of a single, resilient tree she could see on a distant rooftop. It felt good to create something again, to impose order on a blank page when her life was in such disarray. She heard voices from Kaido's study, the door slightly ajar. Kaido's voice was tense, strained. The other voice was calm, clinical, and familiar. Dr. Eris Thorne, the kind-eyed man who had checked on her the night of the gala. She knew she shouldn't listen, that it was an invasion of the privacy Kaido had so generously afforded her, but a cold knot of dread tightened in her stomach. "The new regimen isn't working as we'd hoped, Kaido," Dr. Thorne said, his tone gentle but firm. "The progression is faster than anticipated. The tremors, the fatigue, they will become more pronounced." There was a long pause. Lena held her breath, her charcoal stick frozen above the paper. "How long?" Kaido's voice was stripped of all its power, small and raw. "It's difficult to say with certainty," the doctor replied. "Without a more aggressive, experimental treatment, which carries its own significant risks, we could be looking at 18 months. Perhaps 2 years if we're lucky." The world tilted again, just as it had at the gala. But this wasn't a feint. This was a horrifying, lucid plunge into a new reality. The man who had faced down 100 powerful people with a single whisper, the man who had carried her from the wreckage of her life, was fighting his own silent, inexorable battle. He was not an invincible protector. He was a dying man. The shadows under his eyes, the occasional, subtle tremor in his hand she had dismissed as stress, the deep-seated weariness, it all clicked into place with sickening clarity. He wasn't just shielding her from Damien. He was shielding her from this. He was trying to protect her from the ultimate pain, the one he couldn't fight. The charcoal snapped in her fingers. The sound was like a gunshot in the silent apartment. The voices in the study stopped. Lena stood up, her legs trembling, and walked toward the door, a terrible new purpose solidifying in her heart. She was done being protected. She pushed the door open without knocking. Kaido was standing by his desk, his back to her, his shoulders slumped in a way she had never seen before. Dr. Thorne looked at her with an expression of deep compassion and regret. Kaido turned slowly, and the mask was gone. In his eyes was a devastating cocktail of shock, fear, and resignation. He looked utterly defeated. "Lena," he breathed, his voice a ghost. "I heard," she said, her own voice surprisingly steady. "I heard everything." Dr. Thorne gave a small, respectful bow. "I will see myself out." He slipped past her, leaving them alone in the cavernous study, the unspoken truth hanging between them like a shroud. Kaido sank into his leather chair, running a hand over his face. "You were not meant to know." "Why?" she demanded, walking toward him, her anger a shield for the shattering grief she felt. "Why wouldn't you tell me? After everything, don't I deserve the truth from you?" "What good would the truth do?" he shot back, his voice rising with a desperate energy. "To burden you with this? To make you watch me fade? I brought you here to save you, not to chain you to a dying man." His words were meant to push her away, to be cruel, but she heard the terrified love beneath them. "You think your secret is a burden?" she said, her voice softening as she knelt in front of his chair, taking his hands in hers. His hands were cold. The burden was the silence. The burden was the not knowing. This is just the truth. And we can face it together." He looked down at their joined hands, at her dark skin against his, at the tremor he could no longer hide. "I can't give you a future, Lena. I can't give you anything." Tears welled in her eyes, hot and insistent. "Then let me have the present," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Don't take today away from me, because you're afraid of tomorrow. Let me have whatever time we have left." He looked up, his own eyes glistening. He saw not pity in her gaze, but fierce, unwavering strength. A love that wasn't afraid of the ending. He leaned forward, and she met him halfway. His lips were soft, hesitant at first, then deepening with a desperate, heartbreaking tenderness. It was not a kiss of passion, but of homecoming. A kiss that tasted of regret, of lost years, and of a love that had finally found its way back, even at the edge of darkness. Their days took on a new, precious rhythm, each moment imbued with the bittersweet knowledge of its fleeting nature. They lived in a bubble of their own making, suspended above the world. The soft romance that had been a hesitant spark now burned with a quiet, steady flame. They learned each other again, not as the guarded young lovers they had been, but as two souls stripped bare by circumstance. Lena discovered the man behind the fearsome reputation. He loved old jazz records, the scratchy vinyl a comfort in the silent apartment. He was a surprisingly good cook, his movements in the kitchen as precise and focused as they were in all other aspects of his life. He taught her how to make ramen from scratch, his large hands guiding her smaller ones as they kneaded the dough, a simple act of domesticity that felt more intimate than any grand gesture. In return, she brought light back into his monochrome world. She filled the apartment with the scent of baking bread and the sound of laughter. She would tease him about his stoic demeanor, poking his side until a reluctant smile broke through his composure. For a feared Yakuza boss, she'd say, "You are surprisingly ticklish," and he would capture her hand, his thumb stroking her palm, a full, genuine laugh escaping him. A sound she treasured like a rare jewel. But the outside world still clawed at the edges of their sanctuary. Damien, enraged and humiliated, doubled his efforts. His lawyers filed lawsuits, and his media mouthpieces churned out increasingly vile stories. Kaido's advisors, led by the ever-loyal Kenji, urged him to retaliate. "He is a stain on your honor, Kaido-sama," Kenji insisted one afternoon. "He attacks the woman under your protection. One word, and his entire empire will be ash." Kaido sat by the window, watching Lena sketch the winter sunset. He looked weary, the illness carving new lines of fatigue into his face. "Violence is a blunt instrument, Kenji," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "It solves nothing. It only creates ghosts. I have made enough ghosts for one lifetime." He would not become the monster she had once feared. He would not use the darkness of his world to solve this, not when he was fighting so hard to live at her light. He was protecting more than just her physical safety now. He was protecting the peace they had found, a fragile treasure he would not shatter with the tools of his old life. The first truly bad day arrived without warning. They were on the balcony, wrapped in blankets, watching the city awaken. Kaido was telling her a story about his childhood, a rare glimpse into his past, when his voice faltered. His hand, holding a cup of tea, began to shake uncontrollably. The porcelain rattled against the saucer, a frantic, jarring rhythm in the quiet morning air. He tried to steady it with his other hand, but the tremor spread, a violent spasm that racked his entire body. "Kaido!" Lena cried, grabbing the cup before it fell. He gritted his teeth, his face pale and slick with a cold sweat. His eyes were wide with a mixture of pain and humiliation. He hated this. He hated being weak, especially in front of her. She wrapped her arms around him, holding him steady as the seizure-like tremors continued. "Breathe," she whispered, her cheek against his back. "Just breathe with me. I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere." The episode lasted only a minute, but it felt like an eternity. When it subsided, it left him utterly spent, leaning against her, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The illusion of time, the gentle fantasy that they could live forever in these quiet moments, was shattered. The disease was not a distant shadow. It was here, in their home, in his body. Later that night, as she helped him to bed, he finally broke. The armor he had worn for a lifetime crumbled into dust. "I never stopped loving you," he confessed, his voice thick with unshed tears. "Leaving you, it was the greatest mistake of my life. I thought I was being noble, protecting you from this. I imagined you happy with a good man, living a normal life. But all I did was sentence us both to years of misery." He clutched her hand, his grip surprisingly strong. "I was a coward. I was so afraid of you seeing me like this, so afraid of the pain it would cause you, that I caused you a different, deeper pain. Can you ever forgive me?" Lena leaned down and kissed his forehead, her tears falling onto his face, mingling with his own. "There is nothing to forgive," she whispered, her voice a vow. "We have this time.
Right now.
And I will not waste a single second of it on regret. I love you, Kaido. I love the man you are right now." In this moment, he closed his eyes, a single tear tracing a path through the lines on his face. It was a tear of absolution. In the final months, Kaido moved with a quiet, determined urgency. He was not fighting for more time, but for meaning within the time he had left. He set his affairs in order, not the dark dealings of the Ishikawagumi, but a different kind of legacy. With Lina by his side, he began to systematically dismantle Damien's empire, not with bullets and threats, but with the cold, precise tools of the law and finance. He used his vast network of information to uncover every dirty secret, every illegal transaction, every act of corruption Damien had ever committed. He compiled a dossier of irrefutable evidence and delivered it anonymously to the federal authorities and the most tenacious investigative journalists in the country. The fallout was spectacular. Damien's world imploded. He was ruined, his name synonymous with fraud and disgrace, his public persona shattered as thoroughly as the champagne flute at the gala. It was a power reversal of the highest order, achieved not through Yakuza brutality, but through a quiet, intellectual vengeance. Kaido had shown the world that his true power was not in the fist, but in the mind. As Damien's face graced the news, handcuffed and defeated, Kaido and Lina watched from the penthouse. There was no triumph in Kaido's expression, only a quiet finality. He had closed a painful chapter. Simultaneously, he worked with his lawyers to establish a charitable foundation, endowing it with a significant portion of his legitimate fortune. The foundation's mission was to support emerging artists from underprivileged communities, providing them with grants, studio space, and mentorship. He named it the Lina Foundation. "This is for you," he told her one evening, signing the final documents, "so you can continue to bring beauty into the world." It's a legacy of light, not darkness. It was his greatest act of love, a sacrifice that ensured her future, her safety, and her purpose long after he was gone. He was giving her a life untethered to his name or Damien's, a life that was entirely her own, built on a foundation of his love. They spent their last weeks cherishing the simple things, the warmth of the morning sun through the window, the taste of tea, the sound of their breathing in the quiet of the night. It was a life lived in the precious, infinite space between each heartbeat. 2 years later, Lina stood on the observation deck of the city's tallest building. The same vista from Kaido's balcony spread before her like a promise. The autumn wind was crisp, whipping her coat around her, but she felt a profound warmth deep within her. The city no longer looked like a fallen galaxy. It looked like a place of infinite possibility. The Lina Foundation was thriving. She had spent the last 2 years pouring her heart and soul into it, discovering a strength and purpose she never knew she possessed. She had become a patron of the arts, a mentor, a leader. She was a creator, not just of charcoal drawings, but of opportunities, of futures. She was his legacy of light. She wore a simple silver locket around her neck. Inside, it didn't hold a picture, but a tiny, folded piece of paper on which Kaido had written a single word in his elegant script, Ikiru.
Live.
It was his last gift to her, his last command. She thought of him often, not with the sharp, stabbing grief of the early days, but with a gentle, bittersweet ache that had become a part of her. She remembered his rare, beautiful laugh, the feel of his hand in hers, the quiet strength that had been her anchor. He had saved her not just from Damien, but from the person she had been, small, afraid, and lost. He had shown her her own strength by letting her see his vulnerability. He had given her a future by accepting the end of his own. A young artist, the Foundation's latest recipient, came to stand beside her. "It's beautiful up here," the young woman said, her eyes wide with wonder. "You can see everything," Lina smiled, a genuine, peaceful smile that reached her eyes. "Yes, you can," she agreed, her gaze sweeping over the endless city. She wasn't just looking at the buildings and the lights. She was looking at a world filled with the echoes of a tragic, beautiful love story, a love that had ended not in darkness, but in a sunrise that promised to keep on rising day after day.